Good evening, Bahamas. You're tuned into MB12, broadcasting from Cable 12 Studios on Robinson Road. Coming up tonight in news, the man accused of the Fox Hill mass shooting breaks down in tears as charges are read to him in court today. As stiffer security measures are implemented at the House of Assembly, consideration being made to increase security for immigration officers. Calls for hangings to resume mount after 14 years since the last one. Plus, the DNA leader calls government's crime plan laughable. I'm Paige McCartney, and MB12 starts right now. Welcome once again to MB12. Just over a week after 4 people were killed and even more gunned down near the Fox Hill Park, one of the men police believe is behind the multiple murders was today arraigned on those charges. KRISTINA McNeil was there as the long list of charges was read. Here's her report.
An emotional outburst outside the magistrate's court complex as a man was arraigned for the murder of 4 people near Fox Hill Park. However, that 29-year-old defendant says he has an alibi for the time of the shooting. 29-year-old Peter Roll of Bernard Road appeared before Chief Magistrate Joyanne Ferguson Pratt, charged with the murders of Shaquille DeMeritt, Eric Morrison, Claudino Davis, and Shaniqua Sands on December 27th. Roll was further charged with 7 counts of attempted murder. DeMeritt was reportedly playing basketball when he was shot in the head, according to eyewitnesses. Roll sobbed today as the charges were read, shaking his head. Those sobs prompted Ferguson Pratt to ask Roll what was behind them. That's when Roll told the court that he was nowhere near the scene of the mass shooting when it occurred. Roll said he was on Dorset Street in Fox Hill when the shooting took place. And not only were there at least 15 people who could confirm his alibi, but he said surveillance cameras from the nearby Big K convenience store would show where he was when shots were fired. Roll was unrepresented during the hearing, but Ferguson Pratt said she would make a note of his alibi. Roll was not required to enter a plea to the charges, and the prosecution will proceed by way of a voluntary bill of indictment. Roll is not eligible for bail and has been remanded to Her Majesty's Prison. He will return to court on March 18th. Reporting from the South Street Court Complex for NB12, I'm KRISTINA McNeil.
And emotions were still riding high as a 24-year-old man was arraigned for the Boxing Day murder of Antonio Curtis. Curtis's family members called for justice and a return to implementing the death penalty.
Set example in this country, you know, obeying no country no more.
According to police reports, Curtis was taken to hospital after receiving a gunshot wound to the abdomen outside of a nightclub near Fowler Street off East Bay Street. Today, Kevon Brown, seen in the red shirt and black jacket, also appeared before Chief Magistrate Joyanne Ferguson Pratt. He was not required to enter a plea to the charge. His attorney, Cecil Hilton, told the court that his client was in custody since December 31st and questioned why the matter has taken so long to come before the courts. Ferguson Pratt said she was not sure why it took so long, but she made a note of his comments. Brown has been remanded to prison and will return to court for service of a voluntary bill of indictment on March 18th. Well, House Speaker Dr. KENDAL Major today confirmed the House of Assembly will see increased security measures in response to the, quote, heightened security concerns the country is experiencing. In addition to metal detection equipment, some officers at the House of Assembly will also be armed. Dana Smith has the story.
The installation of this metal detector at the front doors of the House of Assembly is just one of what officials say will be several initiatives to increase security at the House. The metal detector was first purchased and set up at the entrance under the Ingram administration. However, it was taken down a short time later. According to the Speaker of the House, KENDAL Major, the metal detector was ineffective because of challenges related to having the device properly calibrated. The Sergeant at Arms assigned to the House of Assembly, KENDAL PENNERMAN, said although the metal detector is still undergoing tests, it is a much-needed addition to the House considering the importance of its inhabitants and the ease with which anyone can enter.
In the past, persons had entered the House Assembly and went into some of the workers' bag and stole items and money. Vagrants and other persons just come off the street and go straight into the bathroom. We don't think that should be allowed in this House Assembly because I don't think that it happened nowhere else in this world when it comes down to their House of Assembly or their government building where the Prime Minister or the President bees. So this security initiative is one that really needed to be enforced and put in place.
It was last month that the House Speaker voiced his concerns over the safety of parliamentarians after the home invasion and armed robbery of then acting Prime Minister Philip Brave Davis. Major said if it could happen to Davis, it could happen to anyone. He expressed concerns about security protocols at the House, where he said MPs are sitting ducks.
Possibility of bandits taking over the parliament, taking over the parliamentary channel, and putting all of us at risk. That is a serious national security issue. They could take over the country. I don't feel like the leaders are secure. I don't feel protected. As Speaker, I don't feel protected. I feel under protected. We have complained. We have expressed some concern, and we're in the process of ramping that up. And every time we do, we see different indicators that we are falling short. And the warning, of course, was the Deputy Prime Minister's bodyguard the first time, and now his residence at 7 in the morning. God help us all.
This morning, Major told our news team security at the House needed to be beefed up urgently. He said after meeting with police and the Ministry of National Security, Parliament determined a number of steps to be taken to increase security. In addition to the metal detector, which is still undergoing maintenance, handheld metal detectors will also be used, and the Sergeant of Arms will be armed with a firearm. Major said, quote, "That was part of the reason why I felt like a sitting duck, and the sergeant who is the person I would need to bring the law and order to that place, if something were to happen, he would be the first person I would call upon, and at the very least, he should be armed." Before, the sergeant was only armed with a billy, a wooden club, but Pennerman confirmed this morning he and his deputy are armed as part of the new security measures at the House of Assembly.
That's a fact. Both me and my deputy, Corporal Demerit, both of us are armed, but our weapons are normally concealed. So with that, you're correct.
However, Pennerman wanted to assure the public the new measures are not an attempt to discourage visitors. Rather, the new initiatives are a bid to ensure the safety of the country's government and anyone who may be inside.
I don't want the public to be afraid or feel intimidated in any way. You're still free to come in, but you must go through the screening process before going up in the chamber or in the House itself.
The metal detector is expected to be up and running on Wednesday when Parliament meets again. From the House of Assembly, Dana Smith, NB12.
Meantime, Immigration Minister Fred Mitchell is also calling for a review of security measures for immigration officers after an immigration officer was killed in Andros. Immigration officer Sean Gardner and his friend Tishka Brainin were reported missing on November 25th last year. In December, skeletal remains were discovered in central Andros. Mitchell says it's just one of two recent incidents which have brought the security of civilian officers to the forefront, and as a result, some officers may need to be armed.
The second incident was an incident involving one of our senior officers who lives in the Chippingham area. And had he not had a weapon on him, he may not be around to tell the tale. And he was able to foil what was an attempt, it appears, at attacking him in some way with a weapon. he was able to discharge his weapon and foil that attempt on his life. I don't want to be around to have to speak at anybody's funeral, to talk about regrets, if it's something that we can avoid. So I've asked the director to initiate a security review of the principles which govern the way immigration officers are able to protect themselves, to see who will be issued with firearms, and if necessary to expand the reach or the number of firearms that are issued to immigration officers to protect them or to allow them to be able to protect themselves in doing their jobs.
He says the security atmosphere in the country has changed drastically and Bahamians cannot continue to bury their heads in the sand. This comes on the backdrop of an armed robbery at the home of Deputy Prime Minister Philip Brave Davis. Mitchell says a review of security for government ministers may also be due.
There is nothing that you could tell from 1997 to now which appears to have changed with regard to the security for public officials, and I put it as broadly as that as opposed to ministers of government. What I think is that clearly this is a matter which the professionals have to review. It's not for us to be recommending security for ourselves. But the climate being what it is, I would imagine a review is in order, and whatever is appropriate and the country can afford, I think that that is what should be put in place.
There have been calls from members of the public and business community to liberalize the firearms policy. While National Security Minister Dr. Bernard Nottage says he's opposed to that shift, he is willing to those who advocate for a change. He is willing to listen to those who advocate for a change. Well, today marks 14 years since the last hanging was carried out in the Bahamas, a stretch of time that has seen many families, like the one you saw earlier, crying out for justice. But as Juan McCartney tells us in this report, their cries may be in vain.
On the morning of January 6, 2000, a prison officer left the walls of this Fox Hill facility and posted a notice on its gate that 27-year-old David Mitchell, convicted of killing 2 German tourists, had been executed by the state. The year that Mitchell was hanged, the Bahamas saw 65 murders, then a record. Since then, the record murder count has almost doubled that. Yet no one has been hanged, even though dozens of men have been sentenced to death. The reality is today that despite the pledges and protests by political parties, there will likely be no further hangings in the Bahamas unless the country radically changes its approach to the death penalty. Most legal scholars agree that as long as the Privy Council stands as the country's final court of appeal, the death penalty will remain out of reach. Several Privy Council rulings on capital punishment in Commonwealth countries have essentially tied the hands of lawmakers here, many of whom have openly supported the death penalty. It's also tied the hands of the courts. These key Privy Council rulings have led to only 3 men being left on death row, with 2 of them being put there only in the last few months. Those decisions are the 1993 Pratt & Morgan ruling that being held in excess of 5 years pending execution constitutes cruel and unusual punishment, the 2006 ruling that the mandatory death sentence in the Bahamas for murder was unconstitutional, and the 2011 Maxo Tito ruling that detailed what constitutes the worst of the worst as far as murder is concerned. There's also the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights, to which convicts can appeal after the Privy Council, though Mitchell was controversially executed while his appeal was pending before that commission. With all these avenues of recourse available, no man has reached the gallows in well over a decade, despite an alarming spike in murders that has left hundreds dead and families to mourn. And as the body count grows, many are getting fed up, particularly some in power and those who seek it. My Cal MP V. Alfred Gray, for instance, says he's sick of it and wants to see the Bahamas abandon the Privy Council if it means that hangings will resume.
Our country may have to go to the extreme of hanging these murderers, so to speak, and I want to do it on Bay Street. It's repugnant. I just think that we can no longer think of the Bahamas as this little quaint city with these thugs running around the way they are.
Free National Movement leader Dr. Hubert Minnis has also been talking tough about the death penalty recently, promising to soon bring legislation to Parliament to define the worst of the worst, despite the former administration having already done that.
A murder so labeled by a judge of the Supreme Court shall make the convict liable for execution. We in the FNM mean business.
DNA leader Branville McCartney has criticized the FNM and the PLP for not carrying out the death penalty and has consistently taken a hard-line stance on the issue.
This place would be cleaned up. You know what I say? No playing around with these menaces. None. This place will be cleaned up. They will fear the law.
Even Chief Justice Sir Michael Barnett has called for the country to abandon the Privy Council. Meantime, Tall Pines MP Leslie Miller has called for members of Parliament to make their individual stance on the death penalty publicly known. Prime Minister Perry Christie recently indicated that the country may soon have a discussion on the future of capital punishment.
There's clearly a major disconnect between what Bahamians would believe should be deserving of capital punishment and what the Privy Council has indicated should be the standard. And so it's a vexing matter for the country.
Last year, the Constitutional Commission also recommended that laws be introduced to tie the hands of the Privy Council with regard to the death penalty. As for the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights, it's likely that the Bahamas will find no success in getting the death penalty approved there. That commission has since called for a moratorium on capital punishment and urged the Bahamas to take no further steps to carry it out. From Her Majesty's Prison, Juan McCartney, NB12.